Good morning and welcome to Behind the Gavel with Jason. It's our second interview show back live after our moving hiatus, and I'm thrilled and excited to bring Sarah Reeder back with us. Sarah Reeder joined us about a year ago or so, kind of towards the beginning of the pandemic, or before that even, right at the beginning.
Yeah, a little bit in the midst of it, but
yeah, because
data since then.
Yeah, you had just launched Silver 101, which we'll talk about briefly in a bit. But Sarah, for those you don't remember or don't know, she is an amazing appraiser and has a great history. She's worked at the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, Colonial Williamsburg. She is certified with the ISA, the AAA, and who knows what else. She studied art at NYU. Just an amazing, amazing career, and I'm excited to have her with us. Sarah, give us a couple of seconds, a little bit about yourself, how you got into the appraisal business, and then we're going to talk about how the pandemic and staying at home has kind of changed people's attitudes and thoughts about art, antiques, and all those kinds of things.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction, Jason. It's a pleasure to be back. Really briefly, I'm the CEO of Artifactual History Appraisal. As you mentioned, I'm an art and antique appraiser, and I ended up in this career because I love art and antiques and the stories objects can tell, and it really makes me happy to work very closely with clients and help protect their treasured items and help deepen their knowledge about their treasured items. So I'm excited to be here today.
Excellent, excellent. And so what we talked about before, last time you heard was your new program, Silver 101. How is that being received, just real quickly? I know it's an interesting, when we get asked a lot about silver, I'm sure you do as well. So you created this online course, Silver 101. How has that been received out there?
Really well. It's been so satisfying to me that what I hoped to achieve is happening, and received some great feedback from people who've taken the course about how much they've enjoyed it or it's helped them. And so I'm excited for all the new creations I have planned in the queue.
Oh, you got more coming up. That's exciting. Can't wait to hear about all that. So let's talk about what we plan on talking about today. The last year, 15 months has been crazy. Like nobody alive has experienced anything like this until this happened. And one of the things that I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, is people's attitudes and tastes and styles, and everything regarding the home has changed, including their association with and relationship with antiques, art, estate items, and things like that. What have you noticed just kind of overall from that, the increased time that people are spending at home? How has that affected their relationship with the things they've had and maybe things they've been looking to acquire and surround themselves with?
Thank you, Jason. And before I really dive into my answer, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that while I'll be talking about a tiny slice of context of what happened last year specific to the art and antique market, I don't want anyone watching this to feel like the immense tragedy that we've all experienced is being ignored or overshadowed in this conversation. And as a nation, I feel like we really haven't had the chance to fully grieve and acknowledge what has been lost both individually and collectively. So if anyone watching this has lost loved ones over the last year, I want to extend to you my deepest sympathies. So I really feel like we need to dovetail our conversation with that acknowledgement at the beginning. And thank you. And to get more into your question, moving on to a lighter note, but you can't avoid the elephant in the room. The pandemic and the attention people have turned to their homes, I feel like it's had a big impact on the objects that are in them. And so when people were forced to spend their time at home rather than be out of the house working all day, they began to reach a new clarity about how they wanted to possibly add more beauty to their interior environment. Or they looked around and said, what? These are not things I want to look at all day. So they started making choices, and they purchased art and antiques in increased numbers. I found a really interesting AP article written by Colleen Newvine that was published this spring. And it had some great data about these trends. It charted how art sales have increased dramatically, not necessarily at the gallery level, but in the middle market. And so the article cites data released by Etsy. We all know Etsy. And it compared their numbers from March to December 2020 to the same 9 months in 2019. So Etsy reported a 95% increase in searches for wall art, which is pretty extraordinary. Wow. And looking broader beyond just Etsy, The same article also had some interesting data that was released by Adobe Analytics, and they were compiling this data from analysis of 80 of the 100 largest online US retailers, which, galleries listening to this are probably gritting their teeth because that's not an art gallery. That's an entirely different sort of venue. But it showed that average daily sales of what they called art goods, which could include artworks, sculptures, and picture frames, they increased 134% in terms of sales between the pre-COVID months of 2020 and the fall. So people were clearly looking around their house and making choices. And it also anecdotally has had an impact on what people realized they didn't want in their house. I'm sure a lot of us in the spring of 2020 were, it was like a curbside bonanza for a couple of weeks out on the sidewalks as people were looking around saying, I don't want this, I don't want this. And they would go out on the curb. And I found some really great things that way. It's curious to be an appraiser in that sort of environment. But I think that this is a really valuable process and that people had the time to go through their own internal process of figuring out what they didn't want. And then that would leave a vacuum that they could fill with things that they did want that perhaps better reflected their lifestyle now or what they would like to add to their life now. And that then translated to an increase in purchases of art and other items for the home. And also, I think another factor that its importance can't be overshadowed is that besides just bringing the people who live in the homes pleasure, there the video meetings like this one that have permeated our entire daily.
Sarah, you froze up on me there real quick.
Am I back?
There you are. Okay. I hear you, but you're not moving. There you go.
So in case that got cut out, there's now this cultural pressure that people are going to look at your Zoom background and judge you on that. And you'll notice I have a blank wall behind me because I like to retain a sense of mystery, but this is an intentional choice. But I think people are now not only are they making choices for what they're going to enjoy, they're making choices almost as what they want to represent them to the outer world in that video feed. And so that's also contributed to an increase in purchases of items for the home to kind of curate that telescopic view into the house, or at least the little part that can, your computer monitor shows. This is how you want to be representing yourself. And honestly, I think that the fear-based motivations of the Zoom background judgment are not nearly as healthy a motivation for the sales as the realizing the internal clarity of what you want to add to your life that brings you daily joy. But those have both been factors.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank Sue Autry for commenting, and others, Sue and Penny and Pam and others, for watching us this morning. The shows are always a lot more fun if people comment. So if you're watching, comment or ask questions below. You talked a lot about people appreciating what they have and maybe trying to understand a little bit more about what they have. I have to imagine that there's a tie-in or a cause and effect there. How has the appraisal business been affected by this, if it has? And are you seeing, because, one of the things of us all experience a pandemic is we all understand how things outside of our control can immediately change our worlds, right? In this case, it's society-wide, but, hurricanes, fires, tornadoes, things like that happen randomly. And so I think people understand a little bit more about the idea that singular one-off events can directly impact and affect your home. Are you seeing any kind of response for appraisal business? And if so, what are people what things are they having appraised that they may not have had before?
That is a great point you raised. Thank you for pointing out that, that the renewed sense of how disasters can happen in an instant and the after effects of them. I think that has raised awareness of and an increased just desire and protection of all forms and resiliency. And so that has translated into I've seen that impact in my appraisal business, and it's kind of a multifaceted answer because it suddenly, as appraisers, we couldn't do our job the way we've always done our job. So it required a lot of pivoting because we couldn't safely go into people's homes in many cases during the height of the pandemic before the vaccines were available. So I suddenly had to figure out how to make my business virtual only, which was a very challenging experience, but I did it. And I know I speak for a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs and the appraisal community and others, across the nation that we figured it out, but it was a very difficult year. So first off, I want to express my gratitude to all my lovely clients I'd worked with in the past before the pandemic who reached out to ask if I was all right, express their concerns. Some of them decided they needed appraisal updates or they needed an appraisal service, which all of that really, really touched me deeply. And I appreciate that. That's the kind of relationship I always strive to build with my clients, where we are a community of support. And so that really meant a lot to me. And I fortunately, I also froze.
Just for a second. Now you're frozen on a little bit regular.
Sorry about that. As people were stuck at home, as you mentioned, particularly the people who otherwise would have been out of the house for many hours each day. My service area is in the Virginia and Washington, D.C. area, where we have a lot of high-powered professionals who have very demanding jobs where they almost never home, but suddenly they were home. And so that gave a lot of people in that community the opportunity to look around because now they were working from home and see things that they never had a chance for years to really pay attention to and notice, boy, this should have been appraised a long time ago for insurance coverage or for estate planning or another sort of use. And so it was really an honor to be able to work with those people to bring them the peace of mind as they realized that, wow, it's so lucky I didn't have a house fire these last 15 years, or, that the derecho we had, it's a good thing that it didn't rip the roof off. And so I did a lot of education over this last year about the importance of insurance appraisals, depending on what your policy is. So a lot of people are now better protected. And it was, I found that it did change the types of assignments I could do because since I, for most of this last year, couldn't meet with people on site physically, it was not feasible or really practical to have large assignments, say an estate appraisal of an entire house, whereas smaller assignments like a capsule appraisal report for insurance of the 10 objects that had the greatest value in the house that really should be scheduled, that was much more achievable. So I've recently resumed working on site with fully vaccinated clients, and that's been so fun to have that one-on-one personal connection, the body language, just that being able to interact with them in the moment. And it's a lot easier to appraise things when you can actually look at them. I have a whole wait list of people who had items I couldn't responsibly appraise from photographs. So if any of you are watching this and you're wondering why I haven't reached out to you yet, I appreciate your patience. It's quite a backlog, and it's going to take a while to get through all of that responsibly with the time and care that each client needs. But you will be hearing from me very soon, I hope.
Yeah, this last year has definitely been a year for changing protocols and attention. Like you said, there's some things you just cannot do virtually that you need to have that in-person contact with. And reading a person's body language is so important to being able to do the job correctly. Even though you're talking about inanimate objects, there's so much history behind every piece in every home. And it doesn't matter if it was just inherited yesterday or just bought an antique show at an auction yesterday. There's meaning to that piece that the piece itself cannot bring forward on its own. And so, yeah, that being able to touch it and see it and look at the object in person is just so important, and reading the people as well. You talk about doing a lot of things virtually, and of course, we've all had to learn to do that. What are you seeing? The markets had been going virtually already. A lot of things that we have been doing historically were already online. The tools were there. But obviously, over the last 15 months, everything that could even feasibly go online, like appraising objects, has gone that way. What are you seeing from your clients and potential clients? Are you seeing pushback on that? Are you seeing acceptance of that? And how do you think that's going to continue going forward now that the country is, CDC is released, completely relinquished the mask mandates for most people. In different areas of the country, it's like nothing ever happened. How do you see that, the online portion of it now, and your reaction to it now from clients and then in the future?
I see it being very case by case, and that I have found just in my interactions, some people still like having the virtual ability because, say, there's someone in their family who's immunocompromised, or there's some reason where it's personally safer for them, and so I still offer that option for clients because in some cases that may be the best option for them. Some people, I find more people when it's possible to do so safely, prefer the in-person service, which makes sense because it just, as you said, that the intangibles of being reading the language of the person and the object and the things that are difficult to see in a photograph in some instances. And I've always done work that appraised remotely for certain object types because, for example, I'm a mid-century modern specialist, and I've worked with clients all over the country who are in areas that don't have a local mid-century modern specialist. So I think it still is very useful in certain circumstances to provide the access to the toolbox that is going to meet that person's needs for their intended use.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the case. I mean, we've been an online only auction company long before the pandemic struck, so we're there.
That
That's
was
our
smart.
it was, but not for this. It just was smart for us and how we wanted to approach our business. But talking to colleagues around the country, those who are doing live auctions, the crowds are phenomenal, and the prices realized in person are phenomenal. And for a while, you could say that this venue was better than the other venue, depending upon asset class. And now it just doesn't seem like there's that much of a distinction. Like there's so much pent up demand for going someplace that the live auctions, the in-person auctions, are having a great field day with that right now.
I think to dovetail on that, another I think element to this is not so much appraising, but in the auctions, I think that going forward, having everyone have to up level their technical literacy skills over this last year and learn how to online bid and learn how to basically carry out most aspects of their life online, that is going to have a lasting impact on the markets, because suddenly there's a whole new demographic that knows how to be present and active in that format. And so I've privately heard dealers kind of complaining that they're ready for people to lose interest and go back to their lives so they can get bargains again. And I don't think that's going to happen on any great scale, because that people now know how easy it is.
Right. I think, yeah, that's an interesting thought. I am cautiously optimistic that will remain the case, but I also know, like in my circumstances, for a year, my wife and I didn't go to a restaurant. So we had all that extra money that we didn't spend there. So as society opens back up, there's gonna be a lot more competition for dollars. Which brings me to a question, you're an appraiser, I'm an auctioneer. Value is paramount to both, we both do. Over the last year, many areas have seen a lot of interest, a lot of bidding activity that wasn't there a year before, because people aren't home and they're realizing that it is pretty simple to engage with these prospects. The whole online portion of it. Do you see, and you talked about 95% increase in searches for artwork on Etsy and things like that. There's been a huge push online. Do you see the prices that we're seeing now, or have for the last 8 months? Do you see that being sustainable, or do you see there being a reckoning or a readjustment back to more of what would be considered like what your dealers would expect to find at auctions, where they can buy more wholesale compared to retail? Do you see that being just a short-term thing or a long-term?
I think it's very specific for each object type. And so in one category of object, it may have a longer lasting impact versus others may kind of course correct and go back to pre-pandemic levels once everyone realizes they'd rather spend that money going out to dinner. So I think that it's very as most things with appraising, it's no simple answer. And so I think it's also important to note that while online sales dramatically increased, the overall amount of money in the art market is actually decreased. And so Dr. Claire McAndrew is an art economist, very well respected in the appraisal field. Her annual report is pretty much the appraiser's Bible of what's happening in the art market. And so in her report, The Art Market 2021, which was released in March of this year, and it's based on data that's submitted from a broad survey of all sorts of different participants in the art market globally, and it's aggregated through the different countries. She actually reported that, and I have this here so I could get all the numbers right. Global sales of art and antiques were down 22% in 2020 from 2019, and they were down 27% in 2020 from 2018. And so the total amount of money, actually, the art market contracted, but of what did sell, a huge portion of it was in an online sale, much more than had ever historically been. And I think there are a couple different factors behind that. A really important one is that all of the physical art fairs had to stop being held, which was where a lot of transactions used to happen. And people are still wondering what that is going to look like in the future, and when people are going to feel comfortable resuming those huge in-person physical art fairs where people would fly in from all over the world. It was a disaster from a public health perspective, but they also have a really big carbon footprint in terms of all of those airplane flights and the shipping of the art all over the world. So I'm hoping maybe this might be an opportunity for people to come up with a hybrid model that is kinder on the earth. But so on that level of the market, that really suffered because the traditional way of selling didn't happen. But the middle market got very active with the bored people at home, which, as we saw in like the Etsy data. And then another important factor is, while there was a lot of economic suffering for many, many people through the pandemic and job losses and all sorts of economic suffering, generally speaking, the rich got richer. And so they had a lot of extra money burning a hole in their pocket. And so going forward, depending on where things go, maybe they'll have a different level of buying confidence. But it was a strange bifurcated experience, because some people were really suffering while others not at all. And so I think that different levels of the market experienced different activity because of that. And a lot of in terms of the super, super high end of the market, most people weren't selling it if they didn't have to, because why would you put something forward in a pandemic? And instead they monetized it by using their art as collateral for loans. And so they may not do that in the future. So I think this is a very complicated answer, and I'm sorry about that, but there is no one answer. It's so multivalent for these little tiny subsections of the market. I think in terms of the middle market, I think you raise a really good point that as people now have other places to direct their expendable income, they may have less interest in directing so much of it to items for the home. And plus, they probably filled up their home at this point.
Right. So for those watching, and thanks again, Sue, for commenting. It is fascinating data for sure. Artseconomics.com is a website that Dr. Claire McAndrew started, and you can find all of this information and tons more. She is her report is shared by many people all over the world, and I've read it many times myself. I think it's also fascinating. Like there's so many things there that I want to kind of unpack a little bit. The idea that the art market at large contracted, but I think if there's a way to analyze, and I don't think she does this, she doesn't get into. She looks at the top 20, top 5% of auction houses and bases the entire market off of that. As far as I haven't looked at that.
Yeah, it's very biased towards the high end. You're right.
The transactions were insane, and so I think her numbers are important, but I also think they miss a huge part of the market. Even Sotheby's, last I heard, their average sale price for painting is less than $10,000 because they sell so many works. But you only hear about the 6, 7, 8 figure pieces because that's what makes the news. And we had potential clients this last year as well, saying we're not selling anything right now because we don't know what the market's doing. So I think it's going to be interesting to watch as some of that merchandise comes to the market, how it's received. But I think the buyers are there. I mean, you look at the NFT market, which is insane to me. I'm trying to understand it, and I just can't. Maybe I'm too old. The idea of spending 7, 8 figures on something you can't hang on the wall just doesn't compute. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see the pent up demand for the high end market over the next year or two. And like you said, the economics of the pandemic were really bizarre in that there was a lot of suffering in portions of our economy and portions of our society, but the majority of people weren't affected much at all. And for the markets that our company reaches, we had very little pushback from our customers, longtime customers, because they were working at home, but they were still working and making the same money. And in many instances, like I haven't been to the dry cleaner in a year. So it's just a really strange dynamic. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I can't wait to hear like the major podcasts start doing shows on the effects of it, like Freakonomics and things like that. It's going to be really fun to watch all of that. So have you noticed? So your business has changed. Obviously, you're getting calls in virtual. A lot of people looking for art. Have you seen any kind of trends in the art that people are getting that you're seeing, or is that something that you haven't seen any of that result yet?
Most of the items that people are contacting me for, they already owned. It's less the new purchases. All those people who bought art over this last year and they need to get it appraised for insurance, please call me. But so most of them are pieces that were inherited or they were purchased a long time ago, and we were just getting around to dealing with it. This was the time when people could take care of the things at home. And so in that sense, I haven't seen the impact of those new trends. And if for all things NFT, I always refer to my good friend Claudia Hess, who's an appraiser out in the Bay Area. She has spent more time than I ever care to studying the ins and outs of what I find really challenging to understand. But I think for people who are interested in diving into NFTs, I would recommend they really take the time to educate themselves, because there are risks involved, and it's good to really know what you're doing and make sure that it's aligned with your personal level of risk tolerance.
Yeah, I agree completely. And so far I have no tolerance level for that.
Yeah, I'm in your camp.
So we've kind of talked all about this. Tell us a little bit about worthwhilemagazine.com. That's something that you co-founded a while back. You've had some really interesting, fascinating interviews on there and articles. Tell us a little bit about Worthwhile Magazine.
Thank you. Worthwhile Magazine is totally free. It's an online magazine. It's in the little ticker at the bottom there. You'll be able to have the address so you can go visit it. And it's a magazine that I founded with my good friend, Courtney Alstrom Christie, who is an appraiser in Georgia. Her company's Alstrom Appraisals. And we founded it several years ago because we both were really frustrated with the opacity of the art and antique and appraisal field, and how it was so difficult for users of appraisal services and collectors and connoisseurs and just the general public to get the information they needed to make good decisions. And so we kept encountering situations where people had access to the right information, they could have made a decision that would have led to a much better outcome. And so if you see a problem, you just figure out how to fix it. So we said, let's do this ourselves and get that information out there so that we can organically change the field for the better, give people the tools to make better choices, and then it will eventually help everything. And so it has been so much fun. We have a wide range of content that we publish, both that we write ourselves and that we work with a wide range of really terrific contributors, some of whom have appeared on your show before. And I love having this vehicle to spread information and share new scholarship and really have a community for people who are interested in deepening their connoisseurship knowledge. Both our readership is all over the globe, and it's both people who are professionals in the art and antiques field and the general public and collectors, students. I've had emails from students before, which is really fun that it's there and it's helping them. For me to know that, that's very rewarding. We're always looking for new contributors, but yeah, we actually we entered the digital realm in a new way this spring because we had a free event for our community. Everybody was welcome, where we featured a talk by one of our contributors, collections advisor Spencer Stewart, and it was so much fun. We had people from all over the world come, and it was a really lively discussion. So that was our first time kind of delving off of the online page and into the live format of an online event. So hopefully we'll have some more of those in the future as it feels aligned, because I had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I thought it was interesting. I wish I could have attended it. It seemed like a really neat thing to be a part of.
Thank you.
So Sarah's kind of wrap things up. I've got your contact information up there, info@afhappraisal.com, or you can give Sarah a call at 703-543-2567. What kind of final thoughts do you want to leave our viewers? And I want to turn over to you for just a minute. We talk about a lot of things today. Is there anything we didn't get to today in this topic, or outside of that you think is important to bring forward to people watching?
I love that you always ask this question of your guests. I think it's such a great opportunity. And I've thought about this, and for my answer, I'd like to go back to the sorts of choices and clarity people have had about their homes and really instill in them that even now that the world may be opening up more and people may be spending more time outside of the house in the future, we don't have to ignore the home as a place that supports us and can bring us daily joy and help root us so that we can go out in the world and accomplish everything we want. So even when we're no longer at home as much, that doesn't mean that the choices you make in terms of what you feather your nest with at home aren't important. And so I recently gave this an interview with my friend Larissa Wild on her fantastic podcast, the Art Elevator podcast, this about mid-century modern designers and the art they collected. And what's so fascinating is the art that they collected ended up in many cases having a profound influence on their own designs and their own artwork. And so I think that often we don't give enough credit to the potential positive influence that the things we choose to surround ourselves with can have. And so I would really encourage all your viewers to feel empowered to continue valuing those choices and viewing what they put in their homes as important going forwards.
Perfect. Very well done. And Sue, thank you so much for watching the entire episode. We always appreciate the diehards who come to the beginning and stick around to the end. It makes it's nice to know we're not talking to ourselves.
Thank you, Sue. I appreciate that nice feedback.
And before we completely sign off here, I want to thank everybody for watching Behind the Gavel with Jason today. We started bringing the show to you a couple years ago and started last week with Dwayne Scott Cerny with a great book interview. I do this to promote my company, KCAuctionCompany.com. If you have any questions for us, you can always give us an email at info@KCAuctionCompany.com or give us a phone call at 816-283-3633. I think I'm missing something on here, but I'm sure next week I'm excited. Our guests are from the Symphony in the Flint Hills. We've been involved with them for about 8 years now, doing their auction online. Well, this year we're hoping. 2 years ago the event was canceled because of weather. Last year, obviously, pandemic. This year the event is happening, but the art auction is online right now, and I'll be having people from the Symphony in the Flint Hills as my guests next week to talk about their mission, the art auction, and the event itself. So that should be a great episode. Hopefully continue that. Sarah, again, thank you so much for joining us again today. Look forward to having you on again in the future. And hopefully everything is safe and getting back to normal there in Virginia.
It is. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Great. Thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next week.